You know, I had my April planned perfectly fine. You know, PAX East, Tribeca, video games, red carpets. And I'm like, I got time. I got time before the summer movies come out. And then Robert Downey Jr. had to go ahead and ask, hey, can we all watch Avengers Infinity War at the same time? And Marvel's like, sure. And I'm like, fuck. No, I'm going to be watching it literally as I'm coming back from New York.
Probably Downey Jr.
So yeah. So I'm going to try to make this quick, especially because they kind of want us to be spoiler free. And also, I'm probably going to say a lot of the same things that a lot of other people are. But Avengers Infinity War is a movie that came out, is coming out. And it's a Marvel movie. And it stars Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. And it has literally every person that you could possibly imagine in these movies. And when you look at these posters and watch these trailers, you're like, that's a lot of characters. No, you don't realize. When you're sitting there watching this movie, you realize around the halfway point, man, there are a lot of characters in this movie. But that's what we all wanted. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing either, because as it turns out, the Russo brothers proved the second time around they made a Captain America movie that they could do it better than the Avengers movies were doing. So they just moved that sandbox over to their court. So now you got the Russo brothers filming Avengers Infinity War and the untitled Avengers 4. And they have not revealed the title for Avengers 4 because they're saying that it is in itself a spoiler for Avengers Infinity War. So that plus a very subdued, low-key marketing campaign for Avengers Infinity War should indicate to you this is a half of a whole movie. When they first announced it, they said Avengers Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2. They redacted the Part 1s and Parts 2s, but it is still very much exactly what I anticipated it to be when they first announced it, which was, oh, Part 1 is going to be a MacGuffin hunt, and then the second part is going to be conflict. This movie is called Infinity War, but it is more akin to what we remember Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 being, except that that's a very baseline, shallow comparison in that it's just a MacGuffin hunt, but for multiple MacGuffins as a group of heroes against a villain. And that's about it, because this movie is way better shot, edited, directed, and charming. So they did that because they were like, look at the 600-page book and all these puzzle pieces that they needed to put together and then have a final battle showdown. Let's split it into 2 movies because we're Warner Brothers and we're like, money, 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 money. But Marvel's more interested in making good movies, which is what they did here. But they still had to put all of these characters' puzzle pieces together. And because it's Thanos and you're doing the Infinity Gauntlet story, he has to himself accumulate all 6 Infinity Stones. So this movie is basically a really big chess game where not only does it have to give you the vaguest, starting with the vaguest concept of who Thanos is, assuming that you may or may not have seen the 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and 1 Avengers movie maybe. You have him and building his layers of character and depth and his actual complexity as a villain. And then you have 4 quadrants of heroes split up and intersecting with each other, many of them meeting each other for the first time and building rapport. And then those different groups of character arcs merging into 2 completely non-intersecting independent finale character arcs. Despite all of that, despite it being good, I still feel like I can't say it's a great movie because it's not done. Because it's all of the pieces there were good and well made and well performed for being a pop genre movie, but it's not done. And it kind of tries to play it off as though you just watched like a tragedy unfold. And it's not even really dour or depressing until it really gets to the finale portion. Because otherwise it's just kind of like, it still feels like a Marvel romp, but the characters are in a little bit more of a desperate situation. Is it a spoiler to say which characters are not in the movie?
Well, they're not in the poster.
Yeah, so basically, the characters that you're assuming are in the movie are in the movie. And the ones who are not clearly in the movie by the advertising are not in the movie. I think everybody has too many theories going on, and I think that the speculation needs to stop. I learned that lesson with Spider-Man 3, where that movie ended up being bad, and then I got better. See, I've matured as a moviegoer since Iron Man came out. I got better even more so with Avengers Age of Ultron, where that movie disappointed a lot of people, but for me, I was so hype from the first Avengers movie train that I had so many different concepts and thoughts, and I had written the movie in my head myself because I adore the Ultron plot for some reason, because, I don't know, friggin' Rubik. So I let myself down on that movie because I was expecting a lot from it. And ever since then, I go into a movie, even though I think that it's probably going to be a really solid movie, I just go in expecting nothing. Because if I already have a movie pre-written in my head the way that I want it, I'm not going to enjoy the final product for what it is. This is the movie that the Russo brothers wanted to make, not the one that you wanted them to make. So keep that in mind when you sit your butt in this theater and you go and watch this story unfold, because if you enjoyed the Infinity Gauntlet comics, if you enjoyed stories and animation or comics involving Thanos, this captures the spirit of those conflicts pretty well, or at least an initial one. And for that, it's fine. It's good. Like I said, it's not complete. The movie does the movie does a pretty good job at, better than any other movie before it, it does a really good job at displaying what each of those 6 stones do. So the Reality Stone has a specific devastating kind of use that is different than the Space Stone or the Time Stone. And I think that one of the most interesting things that they did with Thanos is not necessarily his physical power, but his belief in himself and his own ideology, which they kind of reiterate a couple of times through the movie and hadn't really been set up before, but it's pretty true to his traditional character arc. He's a genocidal maniac and thinks he's absolutely right for doing what he's doing. It's weird. The movie feels disjointed because you have so many different types of characters that are just tonally jarring from each other, but they all feel very consistent with their contemporary versions of themselves. Like, the Thor in this movie still feels like he's written by, like, Ragnarok Thor. Tony Stark feels like he's just coming off of Civil War. It all feels on brand and consistent, and sometimes you can judge that for being really calculated, but at the same time, it's kind of commendable that these movies can keep up with all of that as well, that it's a continuously evolving character arc. I find that the movie was able to balance most of its main characters in a pretty serviceable way. I can only really think of a few selection of Avengers characters that don't have a whole lot going on, that they're just kind of there, but they're not the most important anyway. I think that most characters get a pretty balanced amount of screen time, save for maybe a few. I can only imagine what like a first draft of this would have looked like. It would have been an absolute mess. The movie doesn't even really have certain act structures to it. It has its own different story arcs, and they are just constantly intertwining. My initial joke response was the George Lucas Phantom Menace thing, where I imagined the Russo brothers in the editing room going, I may have gone too far in some places. But unlike that finale to the Phantom Menace, these story arc intersections were, I felt like they were pretty balanced, if not jarring from time to time, because you're like, oh my god, okay, wow, we're back here. But I think that it must have been an absolute nightmare to get this edited into the format that it is. And I think that if it were to eventually be watched, when it is eventually watched back to back with Avengers 4, I think it'll flow fine enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did the best that they could with the arc that they were tackling.
Yeah.
And I'm not even familiar with it, so.
Yeah, so if you're not even familiar with the conceptual setup of the Infinity Gauntlet and Thanos, you were able to follow it pretty well. So.
Yeah, wasn't he have like a love interest in it?
In the comics, he did it all for the love of Mistress Death, the embodiment of death as a skeleton lady.
Right, and now he's just kind of like...
There's different interpretations of it. That's like the traditional one, but it still all kind of falls back on him being a genocidal maniac that wants to wipe out half the universe.
And now he's just kind of doing it for balance.
Yeah, he kind of makes it a political stance. It feels like there's a crescendo of finality to this movie, but it is not the finality. If anything, it feels like it's beginning to put a bow on all of those story ends that you've seen in the Marvel Universe up till now, but it's not tied just yet. And so that's why I'm so like reluctant about it, because it's all going to depend on how that last part turns out. But I mean, yeah, there's only so much that you can do. And honestly, there was a lot from this storyline that felt like it was spiritually adapted, either with like replaced characters or like swapped out story points. Yeah, they're being really guarded with like the plot, but I'm not entirely sure why. Well, okay, I guess why. If you've read this story, you can only have so many guesses as to why, but it's not that specific. And there's a few moments that are a little emotionally devastating for certain, but it definitely doesn't feel like this fight's over. It definitely feels like that there's still some things to be done and some saving to do. So, depending on how Avengers 4 turns out, I give the Infinity War a tentative B.
10 out of B.
Tentative B. You know what I mean? Like, as in depending on how the next one is.
Well, it's not like an immediate sequel, so you shouldn't like just give it a B.
Fine, but here's the deal. It's not complete. That's what annoys me about it.
Twin sequel can be released within a month of each other.
No, I would really, really like it if they released Captain Marvel, like at least a little bit earlier, so that they can bump this up like an extra month or something. Like move the schedule up. Like once Ant-Man comes out and they move those other two up, then I'll be super duper happy.